At this point in the class, we've taken the opportunity to learn a lot about drilling. Typically, we've taken a visit to a drilling rig and we perhaps have been out to an operating lease to see how that works. And I can certainly forgive you if during the midst of all that study of drilling and completion and the like, you ask yourself, is this a business class? We're not talking about any numbers. Well, if you felt that way, this class is an important transition for you because we're going to talk lots of numbers. Specifically, we're going to start off in this lecture by looking at a vital document called the AFE, or the Authorization for Expenditure. And what in reality this is the budget to drill and complete a well. Now, I'm making this video in the fall of 2017, and the class has just returned from a visit to the Thompson 1A well in Hardeman County, and Trio Consulting was gracious enough to actually share the AFE for the well that we visited. So you're all wondering, what's the price tag for that well? This is a very classically laid out AFE, and you have copies of this in D2L, so I would recommend that you perhaps print these out and be referencing these as I go through the discussions of the various AFEs. But if you want to get to the bottom line, how much did they budget for that well? A little over $800,000. And I can tell you that that is a very cheap well compared to most of the well drilling and completion costs that you're going to hear about today when people are talking about drilling wells. Well, let's get into how the AFE is laid out and just see where a lot of the money is spent. One thing you see up here is a total depth of 8,300 feet. You're going to see how you have a little bit different information for vertical wells on some later AFEs. This is again a classic one that it separates intangible costs from down here tangible costs. The reason for this is because things called intangible drilling costs are able to be immediately expensed, as opposed to the other equipment which has to be expensed on a standard depreciation schedule. These are accounting subjects, and certainly they're going to be important to business owners because it determines how much tax you're going to have to pay in any given year. The benefit of being able to write off your intangible drilling costs immediately is obviously as you spent the cash up front, you're going to be able to claim the expense up front, so you're not going to generate a tax liability off of what appears to be a bunch of revenue that really cost you a lot of money to generate that revenue. So typically you'll see not all AFEs are the same. They have different layouts, but it's very common to see intangible versus tangible, and then drilling, completion, and total. Because in theory, you could drill a well, it not be a producing well, or it doesn't appear that it's going to be a producing well, so you would choose not to complete the well. And you're going to see that depending on the type of well, that saves a considerable amount of money, so that's why often they're broken up separately. As you get into the intangible drilling costs, you can see overall we're looking at just over $500,000, and the lion's share of it is in the rig rental. So you can see they budgeted 14 and a half days at $10,500 a day. Everything else is, there are some significant numbers, but they don't rise to rival the rig, if you will. You can see the drilling, mud, and chemicals is a major expense. You can also see just trucking and hauling, moving stuff to and from the site is a major expense. Engineering and technical services, my guess is this is Trio's fee for supervising this. That's their profit margin, but I don't know. It could be other engineering services. You can see that surface equipment rental is quite expensive. And then down here, the idea of the directional drilling. Again, he put this in the AFE, wasn't sure that they were going to need it, and then they did. And if you remember, for those of you that visited the well, they're paying $10,500 a day for the rig, and that's very inexpensive. But when they had to call for the directional tools, they were paying basically $7,000 a day for the directional tools, which is a crew and just 3 or 4 pieces of equipment that go down holes. So you can see directional drilling is very expensive. When you get into the tangible costs, not too much in the tangible costs, a little bit of surface casing, and that's really it. When we look at completing the well, this well, relatively speaking, is very inexpensive to complete at only just under $300,000. And the majority of the completion cost is, I'm scrolling up and down so fast. The majority of the completion cost here is in the casing and in the tubing. So just the steel that you have to purchase to line the hole and to be able to bring the product to the surface is a very considerable expense. Everything else is somewhat even, if you will. You can see they bring out a completion rig, which is much cheaper because it's much less capable, that will drill out the plugs and swab the hole and those sorts of things. There's the casing job. Oh, incidentally, many of you visited the mud logger on the visit. You can see that person got paid $6,000 for being there for those 10 to 12 days that they're going to be logging the mud. Again, trucking expense is pretty significant. Engineering technical services, again, I think that's Trio's cut. But completing the well, the big thing is the casing, and then other items that are not cheap. You can see down here, this is the production equipment. The stock tanks, Christmas tree and the like, water tank, and then this is the line heater and the heater treater. This is all going to be a part of the separation equipment. So that's how you add up to $800,000. Big picture that I want you to remember off this is typically AFEs are broken up in intangible and intangible, drilling and completion, and that typically in drilling, the rig rental itself is going to be the dominant cost. And in the completion, in an unfracked well, then the casing is going to be the significant cost. I'm going to pause the video, and then we're going to look at another AFE. The second AFE, which again is in the materials that are available to you in D2L, is for a horizontal well. It's in Louisiana. This is a gas well, probably. And you can see it's a very deep well. They're going to drill it down 12,000 feet and then have a 10,000-foot lateral on it, or basically a 2-mile long lateral. And that's where you see a 22,000-foot measured depth. A lot of times you'll see this. Total vertical depth will be how vertically deep that lateral is. It's 12,000 feet below the surface. And then you'll see an MD or a TD that says, but how long is the well really? So you can see this is a 4-mile long hole that they're drilling. A little bit different in this AFE in that they don't have it broken up as intangible and tangible. Leasehold equipment and development is how they've got it separated. And they have drilling and completion costs. Then as we look into the numbers, and instantly, oh, what's this well going to cost? $11 million. Wow. So big difference over the well that we looked at in the previous AFE. Where's the money tied up? Well, real clear. The money, again, is tied up in the drilling rig. If you look down here in the development cost, you can see they're assuming 50 days to have that rig on site at $18,500 a day. It could be a more capable rig than the one that was rented, and also it could be that just the competition is a lot higher. Rigs typically right now in the Permian Basin go for more than they would, say, in this area, because just supply and demand. So you can see that almost $1 million goes into the rig. Some very significant costs down here. $100,000 for the mud, $300,000 in, I'm sorry, I'm looking at this wrong. $100,000 in the fuel, $300,000 in the mud, $367,000 for bits, reamers, and stabilizers. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time reading. $367,000 is for the directional drilling equipment. Again, notice the price, $10,500 for the rig, but when you bring the directional crew on site, it's $10,500 a day, and they assume they're going to need them for 35 days. So where is the cost of this rig in a big way? Well, it is, or the well, it's in the rig, the directional tools, the drilling fluids. And then if you come up here, they do some interesting things. They have a lot of the casing up even in the production side, and I don't know why. So some of the casing where it's surface and intermediate, that makes sense because that's casing you're going to have to install just to drill the well. But you can see the production casing is $500,000. Pretty astounding. If we scroll down, again, rentals, pretty expensive. Just having the equipment inspected, pretty expensive. So you end up with a total of $3.7 million. But you've got $7 million to complete the well. Well, obviously you see where that's going. That is going to the frac job. They estimate they're going to frac this hole in 50 stages. And so that's basically $100,000 per stage. And this is paying for the equipment and the manpower and the expertise to run the frac job. And again, you see some pretty significant expenses with equipment, but everything pales in comparison to the frac job. And what's a little bit interesting is that there isn't much casing expense here in the completion. There's $165,000 in tubing, subsurface equipment. I don't know if that means they're going to put an ESP down. And again, this is some of the surface equipment that they're going to need to actually produce off of the well. So big picture again, where is the biggest expenditures? In the rig, in the directional drilling if it's required, in some cases the mud and the fluids, and then casing is expensive. When you get into the completion, casing is expensive, although in this well they didn't put the casing. I don't know if it's an open hole completion or something like that. You don't see any production casing. But then the frac job, and you can see just how expensive that frac job is. Pretty mind-boggling to spend $11 million in a well. And that's why in a couple of classes we're going to be talking about the financing, but it's very common that nobody has 100% of the working interest in these wells simply because it's too much money to consider. So I encourage you to spend some time looking through all the AFEs I provided you with. When you come to class, you can ask me specific questions. I'm not going to test you on specific things. I want you to know orders of magnitude. Where does a lot of the expense lie? This idea of tangible versus intangible is important. And we're going to go on now and start to look at, now that we've drilled and completed the well, what's it going to cost us to continue to operate the well?